Hi, it's nice to have my mentor on, Adam Pennway. We worked together at Louisville, and then before that, you were with the Sixers, you were with Washington Wizard, and now you're at Japan. So it's been like what, a year since last time we talked. So introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome to, play a small role in your development as a practitioner, and it's been awesome to see your journey and path and all the great things you're doing. But yeah, Adam Petway, currently the executive director of player health and performance for Levanga Hokkaido, um, same town that Shohei Ohtani played in,
Oh,
and just a beautiful place in the world. So this will be my second year in the B League or Premiership, which is the highest level of basketball in Japan. And yeah, just had the pleasure and opportunity to work at every level of basketball in the United States. My first job out of undergraduate was at a high school. I worked at Division III, mid-major, high major, NBA. So kind of traversed the gamut of levels of basketball. And this will be my second year working in FIBA or international basketball, and it's just been an amazing experience. So happy to share on that and elaborate on that during the podcast.
nice, nice. So obviously, NBA moving toward this biomechanics thing. Every team have their own biomechanics lab. Uh, Triaxial force plate, 10 camera system, Colossus. Um, so my question to you is, first question is, you're the first biomechanist in the league. Like that was like what, almost like 10 years ago. Have you ever like back then, did you ever see this happening? Like every team had their own biomechanics lab?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that, I guess that was about 8, 9 years ago now, but I do believe that the at the start of this whole thing and the impetus behind it, I do believe that eventually all 30 teams would have a full-time dedicated biomechanist. And what I think the league and the league office has done, subsidizing all of these labs with markerless motion capture, embedded triaxial plates, is really an amazing feat, and it really speaks to kind of where the field is going and the investment that the league's taken to kind of take this standardized and repeatable, testing battery and put it in all 30 practice facilities. I mean, you're going to have a cohort of, 450 plus athletes testing, quarterly. That's a fairly robust data set, and you could, really build out upon that over several years. And I think really, ask some really good questions and probably get some really good answers, with a robust data set like that.
Hmm. So before we move forward, uh, I talked to Dr. Susan Sigurd, Christopher Powers, all those guys, Dr. Arnold. And when I go visit them, visit their lab and talk to them, one thing they all brought up is like uh they think like we should like NBA should be like baseball, at least in the future, have like a person just dedicated to collect the data
Hmm.
and interpret the data.
Right.
Why do you think that is? And like I, I mean, obviously a lot of like most of the NBA team right now, they have their sports science guy do all that. So why do you think that like these guys say, oh, there's gonna be a guy that dedicated to biomechanics lab in the future?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I do think that these roles that, now the league's investing in it, they'll absolutely have just a dedicated singular biomechanist for the standardized and repeatable assessments, as well as parsing all of the data and making it, palatable to all of the, members and key stakeholders within the staff, whether that's the front office, health and performance department, technical, tactical coaches. So I do think that that is very, very important. I do think though, within that, I do think the ability to ask the right questions is paramount when you're kind of vetting and hiring these people for this role, right? So there's different types of practitioners, and depending on the hierarchy or the structure of what your staff looks like, There may be, people that are really skilled in just columns and rows and, ones and zeros and just parsing different data, making it visual, and then maybe the director or the VP of Health and Performance is kind of asking the questions and kind of maybe proctoring some of what they want to see from what some would consider more of a data scientist with a biomechanics background. And then I do think just depending on, level of skill set and then just situation, there are these kind of hybrid roles that may be able to traverse like, the medical side. Maybe they have a PT background or maybe performance. Maybe they're more strength and conditioning or sports science, but are dedicated to the assessment and the standardized and repeatable protocol that comes from this biomechanics lab. So it really just depends. This idea of a reconditioning practitioner has kind of been put on my plate recently. And, the more I kind of think about it and ruminate on it, I do think this idea of reconditioning is really, really just it's very intriguing right now to me, just because, we were out in California 2 weeks ago and, one of your mentors and somebody that's had a great influence on me, Coach Dan Paff, was talking about this continuum of, once injury occurs, is there a surgical intervention? The orthopedic surgeon typically does a great job, right? Early stage rehab and physical therapy. Once surgeries occurred, the early stages in rehab are really good. At some point on that continuum, they hand them off to, or yeah, the athlete off to the strength coach, right? And the weight room is pretty good. But in this kind of late stage return to play and return to performance, there's kind of a gap. And it seems like the late stages of, return to performance and reconditioning. And then when they hand off to the technical and tactical staff to get back on the field or court or pool or track or whatever that looks like, there seems to be a disconnect. And I think when we talk about biomechanics and we talk about like testing, why would you test and use the scientific principles that we know from biomechanics to help your athletes, right? If somebody was to say, if an athlete was to come in and curmudgeon on a Monday morning and they had to test, and they said, "Why am I doing this?" What would you say, Eric, in a biomechanics situation if you had to test them in a lab?
I mean, like I'll say, know how you move, be able to like help you reduce your injury risk, and like if you really do get injured, we're able to like get you back like faster, or even
Sure.
like know how to get you back.
Sure, absolutely. So you want to assess the capacity for performance and you want to mitigate potential risk for future injury, right? So
Yeah.
I think those are kind of the two areas where I really see this kind of biomechanics role and the biomechanist is really, really helpful is you onboard an athlete, you have a free agent, a rookie, a draft prospect that you bring in. The initial battery of assessment that you use and the needs analysis that you create from this role is going to be very important on forecasting and projecting capacity for the athlete, or if they've encountered previous surgical intervention or previous injury, say, hey, the way they're loading and the way that they're sequencing their joint actions is potentially risky based on all the known factors that we have. But on the other side, on the more, I guess, day-to-day process, an athlete has a grade 2 hamstring strain, an athlete ruptures their Achilles tendon, has an ACL tear. In the late stages, in each phase of the return to performance process, I kind of see these standardized and repeatable protocols and having someone dedicated singularly to executing these and parsing the data and informing all of the key stakeholders in the process as very valuable within a health and performance or just a high performance team in general. So I do see, the role of the biomechanist. Again, it could go either way, just depending on the hierarchy and the structure of the health and performance staff. But I do think, having someone that has the ability to, work in columns and rows and visualize data and be very standardized and repeatable in how they do so is really important, but also a practitioner that can ask the right questions, disseminate the information to the right people at the right time, and kind of traverse this reconditioning or maybe forecasting out capacity using and utilizing, the principles of biomechanics, right? Um, because and just going back to like what is a biomechanist, if you look and baseball has done such an amazing job, I think over the last probably 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? The X and Y coordinates are fixed, right? You start and finish in the same location and pitching and hitting. Occlusion from the cameras, right? So if you're on the pitcher's mound, there's not going to be an umpire or a teammate come and obstruct the view of the cameras. So there's a lot of reasons that they've invested in this over the years. But I think going back to like what is a biomechanist? Well, biomechanics is a scientific discipline, right? That deals with mechanics, right? In the science of mechanics, but also of the biological system. And a lot of practitioners miss that second part, right? Where it's more so dealing with the mechanics of rigid bodies and applying that to athletics, where the biological organism of an athlete, I mean, tendons, ligaments, muscle fibers, bone, they all remodel at different weights. So I think a lot of practitioners just look at, hey, magnitude of force production or joint torque or kinetic energy. If we just have these outputs, regardless of the inputs, like we're kind of moving the needle in the right direction, right? I do think acknowledging the very complex human system that is biology and acknowledging that there's different rates of adaptation for different systems and subsystems within the human body is also something I see in a lot of well-meaning practitioners out there, kind of practicing or claim to practice the discipline of biomechanics. The other thing I see too is just a lot of like film review and analysis of just technique and technical aspects of shooting or running or whatever it is, and it's like, oh, that's biomechanics, where it's more so movement analysis. Everything kind of has a place on the continuum as it relates to sport performance and sports science and high performance. But I do think having a very structured, dedicated, singular person to the discipline of biomechanics within the realm of basketball is really important. What that looks like is going to be completely dependent on, again, the structure of the department and the skill set of that individual. Sometimes it might be two people, right? I could see like a head of biomechanics and a biomechanics assistant. One's really good at parsing data and visualizing in columns and rows, and that's all they do. And the other one is more big picture. Hey, what questions are we trying to answer? What's our needs analysis, and what assessments can we use within this lab or within this discipline to, again, increase capacity for performance and decrease potential risk of injury, right? So I think some forward-thinking, organizations out there, just depending on the sport and depending where they are in the world, might actually have multiple peoples within this one department.
Nice, nice. I know like baseball, a lot of baseball teams actually have more than one person as a biomechanist. And some of the basketball
Yeah,
team already do that, right?
right.
So talk to me about the testing part. Like obviously we can't really share like what the leagues are doing, but like a lot of jumps. Um we went on a trip like 2 years ago,
Mm.
use force weight and 1080 to do like XYZ axis or like deceleration. I recently like pulled the videos to see how we did that, and that was like really amazing. We were able to like get really interesting stuff. So talk to me about your thoughts on like what should we do in terms of the testing.
Hmm. Yeah, no, again, I think it depends on what questions you're trying to answer, right? And always when you're creating a needs analysis or a testing battery, I think that should always be at the forefront of whatever you're doing, right? With that particular study that we did, and that was a great study, and that was really fun. To give a little background, it was myself, Ola Eskred, from 1080 and the Norwegian Institute of Sports Science, Damian Harper and Daniel Cohen from the UK, all great practitioners and great researchers. We just kind of created this team of just trying to figure out, what does X, Y, and Z, vertical, lateral, and horizontal deceleration look like in elite basketball, right? I think that's something that, like, I still don't think we know. But it's something after, the project that you and I did from a data collection standpoint. I think we have a little bit better insight. And what we did is just packed up our stuff, right? So we had 1081 and we had a pair of uniaxial dual force plates, commercial grade, and and they were portable, so we could move them on and off the court. And we just traveled around to 10 different Power Four college basketball teams in an elite prep school down in Atlanta, and we tested all their athletes. I believe there was 24 different movements that we did. Um, Vertical, so jumping, drop jump, counter movement rebounds, single leg counter movement, and single leg drop jump. We did different horizontal tasks, 5 and 10 meter ADA, so different entrance velocities, different, entrance distances. And then we did a 505, change of direction, and then a frontal plane assessment, so a 5-5 lateral shuffle. And then based on that, we just wanted to kind of like parse the data and just look at distribution. What are norms? Is there differences in position, guards versus bigs? Um, you know, on the video analysis, a lot of interesting stuff kind of crept up, but the main question we're looking to answer is, um, if you're good vertically, because everybody, it seems somewhat ubiquitous in basketball, and it makes sense. Our athletes jump and land a lot to test jumping in basketball, right? Everybody's probably doing some form of jump testing within basketball, right? So if you're good at jumping, are you also good at decelerating horizontally? Are you good at changing directions? Are you good at moving in the frontal plane, deaccelerating and reaccelerating in the frontal plane? So really, we just wanted to look at just this triaxial grid of deceleration within elite basketball, and it was a great study. And one of that was probably of that year was one of the probably the best projects we did of that year. You're involved as a second year school student with us, and I'm pretty proud of, what we did with that.
Nice, nice. So, um, on that study or after that project we did together, we talk a lot about like the penultimate step or
Mm,
pre-penultimate step. And
mm,
if and as research shows, like they put more force on the penultimate instead of the pivot step. But
mm.
like in sport, that's not when injury happened. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I think so, particularly in the 505 change of direction, and this is really important. And after retrospectively going through the data, and screening for injury, right? So something that requires surgical intervention that they were out a long extended period of time. There was a couple of guys with previous ACLs, obviously they were full go and return to play. It happened, 24 months, 3, 4 years prior. But when looking at that, right, it it was actually kind of paradoxical in nature that any athlete of the cohort, there was probably, 14 to 16 that experienced any kind of like serious lower extremity injury prior, but were full return to play, had a pretty big time deficit or asymmetry. However, they were more efficient at turning off the affected limb, right? And like after breaking the film down with you, and after just kind of vetting and just looking at the research, it makes sense because you exactly hit the nail on the head. The magnitude of horizontal ground reaction force is going to be greatest in the penultimate step, right? At the point of zero velocity where you have to turn, right? The trail leg is going to have most of the brunt of the weight distribution, right? So you're kind of leaning away from the lead leg at the point of zero velocity, right? So if I have torn my left ACL, right, and I'm turning off my left limb, my right side will be the penultimate, and my right side will be the trail leg. So I'm basically leaning away from the affected limb or the previously affected limb. So that side, in turn, and there's probably it is going to be more efficient. Now, I say that there's probably some neural inhibition and some things that we don't know about, interlimb asymmetry as it relates to maybe they trained on the affected limb and turning and cutting off that limb just in the return to performance process. I don't know. But when you break down kind of like the physics of like a 180-degree change of direction, it makes sense why athletes would be more efficient in turning off of the affected limb, right? Just based on what you said, the magnitude of force in the penultimate step is going to be the greatest, and then the weight distribution at the point of zero velocity. Now, if you cannot set up your penultimate step, right, and kind of cast a little bit, and that goes back to your original question, if you toe peg the penultimate, right, you're not going to be able to create enough braking horizontal force to redistribute your center of mass equal and opposite in a different direction. Well, whatever that looks like. So if you're two planar flexed and not rigid and stiff enough upon ground contact, you're typically going to over rotate, create a lot of shearing forces at the knee joint. The trunk's going to collapse and probably have to like take a lot of the brunt of like the point of zero velocity, and you're not going to be able to get that medial trunk lean and that good lean and that weight distribution in the point of zero velocity to, change directions and reaccelerate in the opposite direction, right? So setting up and grinding that penultimate step, not grinding, but gearing up and having a very stiff, rigid foot and a very good heel strike upon, that penultimate step was very important and an indicator of success within the change of direction task, right? As it relates to injury, I don't know. I don't think the penultimate step's as important. And like talking to some smart people and talking to a guy that you really admire named Franz Bosch 2 years ago at the ECSSA and the EuroLeague strength coaches, Kostis and those guys. It's actually where I met Ola. They do a great job. I love and this is science, right? In football in Europe, he had the same observations of single leg casting, bilateral pro hopping, and more of a vertical. The same three mechanisms that we found in basketball for ACL injury as an observation, and Francesco Della Villa has had multiple research studies published on this in UEFA in European football, has found the same thing, right? And what he said in this casting mechanism, if you kind of reverse, and we didn't even look at this, and after watching the film, after what he said, over lowering the center of mass, right? In the penultimate step on a single leg cast is an indicator or consistent of what he saw within those mechanism of ACL injuries, right? Um, to me, it's more of like, where's your strike point in relationship to your base of support? Like if you're just casting way too far out and you're striking that heel, like that's typically the biggest risk factor. But when we kind of reverse back and did look at that, it was consistent in basketball as well as like kind of like this over lowering of the center of mass going into the penultimate prior to that casting of the step where they tear the ACL, right? So he found that, and also this idea of knee flexion hip extension paradox, right? Of the 2 foot landing, or the pro hop as we called it, was also observed within rugby and within European football. So I think anytime you can replicate the same findings in a different population, you're kind of on the right track from a scientific perspective. So it was really cool to hear him say that. But after reviewing the film, there does seem to be kind of like an over lowering in the penultimate step prior to that single leg casting mechanism. Um, that resulted in injury compared to those athletes performing similar maneuvers at similar entrance velocities and similar joint angles that did not get injured, right? So I would say it goes back to probably having more of a stiff, rigid foot upon ground contact. Because again, if your foot is if the damping ratio is off and if you're toe pegging and excessively planar flexed, right? You're probably going to over yield at the knee and over lower that center of mass, right? And then on the ensuing step, it kind of results in more of a risky maneuver, so you're kind of catching yourself there. So again, I don't know as it relates to penultimate injury, but just something that somebody fairly smart who I take as credible said, and seems to hold true, as an observation.
Nice, nice. Uh, you mentioned that on the penultimate step, if they don't, if they plantar flex too much,
Mm.
the knee's gonna take on a lot of loading.
Yes.
So So I there's a research I think like 2 years ago talk about basketball players have like really stiff foot, and a
Mm.
lot of them actually lose their midfoot range of motion at like age of 21. So do you think that's gonna be affect like one of the factor that like we have more and more injuries these days?
Hard to say. Yeah, I think it's all at play, right? Everything is at play as it relates to injury. Um, that's probably a downstream effect of an upstream problem, meaning like, yeah, it's like, yeah, all the basketball athletes kind of lose their midfoot at certain like ages, and it may predispose them to future risk. I don't know. It does seem though like that, yeah, if you don't have midfoot stability and control, that could set you up for potential, danger down the road. Because you're
Mhm.
either going to slam your heel into the ground or again, over planar flex, at ground contact. And again, that's going to cause a lot of shearing at the knee joint, up the chain. So, it really depends. But yeah, I think it's all at play for sure.
Yeah. And the following question is like, obviously there are people looking at the foot and ankle, but somehow like I feel like we don't focus enough at foot and ankle. We look at like the overall like all right, the force plate jumps, we look at
Mm.
catapult connects on, we
Yeah.
look at some teams do force frames, some teams do I don't know, Nordic. And when it comes to foot and ankle, like most of the team mainly just do like the traditional talus posterior glide or some sort of plantar flexion ISO.
Mm.
Uh, like why do you think like we're moving away? Do you think we're moving away from like the foot and ankle? Or like do you think we should put more focus on that?
Yes, on both fronts. I don't think we're moving away from the foot and ankle. It's just hard. Again, the distal structures of the lower leg shank are some of the most elastic in the human body. We also have 26 bones, 33 joints per foot. So there's a lot going on, quarter of your structure below the malleus. So a lot is going on in the foot and a lot is going on in the ankle. Um, I think from a testing perspective, it's just easy to test. It's easy to sit down and say, hey, isometric planar flexion, look at the peak force, look at the rate of force, and then you could look at right versus left. And it's just easy to quantify. Um, there's a lot of nuance that occurs within that, when you're sprinting, when you're jumping, when you're changing directions. I do think from, and you mentioned midfoot stability. I think spending a year and going into my second year in Japan, you know, um, as you know, most of the people and athletes are going to be barefoot a lot of the day, right? They actually train the midfoot in a way I've never seen, and it's like it goes back, and it's really cool origins. It's ancient times, going back to like samurai, and they call them samurai shoes, and they would train on these like wooden pegs for the midfoot where you'd have to grip and create stability around like these kind of sandals that you wear. And you can locomote in them and squat and do different things. But none of our guys that were domestic to Japan that grew up doing these things, whether it be walk around barefoot most of the day, train on samurai shoes as they call them. A lot of the physical disciplines are in the martial arts, so kendo, judo, sumo, things like that, where you're barefoot and having to leverage your mass against an opposing force. Like we never really had anybody with like lower extremity type issues within that cohort, right? Some of our international players like did struggle with that because again, they're playing 13 months out of the year in AAU. They played a long time. Foot architecture, anthropometrics, body mass, just completely different, right? But just as an observation, one group had zero, midfoot instability issues, and the other group, as you know, all kinds of sesamoid, first ray, cuneiform, right? Mid tarsal, like calcaneal cuboid. They're all just locked down. It's like one thing. Like those little bones don't move independently. And that predisposes you for chronic knee pain and low back pain. Like we've known this for a while. So I don't think we're necessarily like moving away from the foot and ankle. Because I think people recognize like its value as it relates to, again, capacity for performance and decreasing potential risk. But what I can say is with the abundance of diagnostic tools available in the landscape of the current sport performance, sport medicine, sports science realm, I think it's very hard to quantify, right? What is the mid-tarsal joint doing, at mid stance in locomotion, right? Like, what degrees is it inverting, everting? What is the talonavicular doing in relationship to the calcaneal cuboid? Are the cuneiforms moving independently? What's your first ray function, at toe off? All of these things are extremely nuanced. I think they do matter from capacity and from like a prophylactic standpoint. It's much, much harder to quantify and give it a number. Because again, it's all about outputs and going back to those rigid bodies, right? Versus the biological system. Like, what are you measuring? And really, there's a lot we don't know. So yeah, maybe you could come up with a cool test or something we can do to evaluate the foot and ankle in situ. But I think a lot of it is just like just a lot of it's very hard to quantify. And a lot of it's very, very difficult to just assign like a binary outcome or just a number associated with it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next topic I want to ask you is load management. Obviously, you do consulting for Connection right now. Uh, publish a lot of load management paper in the past few years. So talk to me about load management is a big word right now. I don't want to use that word. All right, let's say this. If if you have like if you're let's say if you're a director of performance or if you're a VP in the NBA,
Hmm.
you have like you have like a week till like playoff, right? Right? You got a week rest, nothing to play, just
Hmm.
practice till playoff.
Yeah,
How would you program like the load and intensity for the practice?
it's a great question, Eric. I think, well, first, like load management, and you've been in a lot of these meetings. Like, I think we need to change the term of load management. And you've seen how it's been thrown around. It was particularly by sport coaches and people that are unfamiliar with like the dis. I think it should just be like physical preparation because that's all it is, right? Like what you shouldn't do too much at certain times. Don't spike acute, loads and keep chronic loads high throughout the season. Like, I mean, that's the basis of like fitness and fatigue or physical preparation. Um, if you look at the distribution of an 82 game NBA season, it's a double peak or a U shape as it relates to time loss injuries. We know early, training camp, middle of October, late October, there's a spike, goes down around Christmas, comes and rears his ugly head again, after All-Star break going into the playoffs, right? So there's probably a fitness component early, maybe a fatigue component late in the season. But I think, again, as it relates to increasing capacity and as it relates to mitigating the risk of potential injury, just be smart and systematic about how you program in your physical preparation from the court. And like that takes care of a lot of that, probably like 95% of it. Now there's nuance to if injury does occur, like what's your loading strategy in return to performance. Trades happen mid-season, obviously. Guys go down in the rotation. There's a spike in minutes. Some of those things you can't avoid. But again, I think, in your hypothetical question, if you have 7 to 10 days to prepare, uh, one thing I've noticed just looking at a lot of data, like I've looked at a lot of data, a lot of different things work. some coaches like to practice a long time, particularly in college, and that works. Some coaches just like to come and walk through, and that also works. I think it's mainly like the roster you have, the players, like personality types, who you recruit, what like, if you have a bunch of vets, out there that have been doing it for 10 plus years, they're not going to want to come in and, practice coming out of a back to back or, but if you have a lot of young rookies, maybe they need a little more volume. And then within a roster, like, you could probably kind of individualize that based on like, hey, small sided games, 2v2, 3v3 half court. For some of your younger and more development guys, maybe your older guys and your vets on the roster get a little more rest and recovery during their off days. So it really depends. But man, like everything works. It's really just like, what does your roster look like? And the really smart and good coaches that I've been around are able to maximize what they have in the locker room, you
Yeah,
know? And
yeah,
that's really like what it comes down to. I've looked at a lot of things. And the other thing I'd say, and this is where people get wrong, like after really examining a lot of different teams is like whenever you try to change anything drastically in the middle of the season, particularly later, it's usually met with maladaptive qualities. Meaning like if you're a high volume team, and maybe you're like that in college, your practices are really long, but you've had success. If you all of a sudden just taper and just cut off, typically it's going to be met with poor performance. So once you're in your routine, just stick to your routine, right? And what that looks like for you and what you believe in as a coach. Make sure you don't do too much too soon, right? And make sure you don't try to change things drastically late, above or below. And typically that's the most systematic and sound way to run like a physical preparation. I'm not going to call it load management. I'm not going to use that term anymore, but a physical preparation model, you know?
yeah. All right. Another question related to this. You've seen basically everything in basketball. Like you've been with high school basketball, college basketball, NBA, go back to college, then now you're at Japan. Do you see like there's a lot of difference between the state and Japan? Just in terms of like the coach, how they structure their practice, how they like I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's very different. Different culture, different kids. Typically the kids we get don't play as many games in high school. It's more focused on skill development, very skilled. It's more focused on multiple sports. Like kids, again, in the high school ages in Japan, 14 to 18, you are required as a high school student in Japan to pick either kendo or judo to participate in. So you have, as a physical discipline, leveraging your body mass, kinesthetic awareness, just knowing where your limbs are at in space. I think just global athleticism. I think those guys are really just outperforming us. Now, smaller country, it's more, I guess, a war of attrition there. There's just less people. From an anthropometric standpoint, it's a little different as well. But one thing I'll say is just, and I think that's why you see the Japanese doing very well in baseball as well is just because, again, less games, more on skill development, and then the physical discipline growing up is steeped in the martial arts. So again, you have to choose. It's not like even if you're Shohei Ohtani, you still did kendo or judo in high school, which is amazing. Like that's could you imagine if LeBron James or like, Kevin Durant did a martial art in high school? Like maybe things would be different. I don't know. Like, would that make them? It would be interesting as a case study. I don't know. It's just as an observation. I think coordination and just kinesthetic awareness globally is just a lot better in
Yeah.
that cohort. But we're still the champs until somebody knocks us off. We won gold in 24. Will we win gold in 28? I don't know. But like I do think our system values way too much playing and not enough development. And then, kids just start playing basketball year round at like 9 years old. So that's probably the two biggest differences I've seen.
And it's probably in every sport. I remember like talking to Randy and he said like uh if you go to Asia, if you go to China or if you go to like uh Europe, they actually have better long-term athletic development than the state.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think we just have a ton of people and a good pool of athletes to draw from. Not to say, I mean, again, Eric, everything works, man. We're not doing bad. It's just like, our system, we're probably leaving something on the table,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
works for us.
All right, another kind of related to this, but like um I remember like talking to like our mentor, Coach Boo, and
Hmm.
talking to Randy Huntington. They all mentioned this, like if you start a practice, wait, if you structure a high intensity practice after off day, they
Hmm.
usually didn't perform well. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
if you if you do a moderate intensity, moderate
Mm,
volume, then set a high intensity on the second day, usually they'll perform better.
yeah.
But somehow, like you see that a lot in track. Do you think that model work with in basketball? Because I don't see that a lot in basketball. Maybe I'm wrong.
Depends on your schedule. So like our schedule in the big league last year, we would have back-to-backs on the weekend, play the same team, but then have an off day and then 5 days to prepare for the next team. And it was the same team. So it's really interesting structure. So you're exactly right. We could have a moderate day, a high intensity day, that second day coming out of an off day, and then kind of like have like a step load and then reverse step load into the competition, right? So it was really interesting, and we had pretty good success, particularly on the second half of the back-to-back doing it like that. I think when you're in the NBA, 82 games, 3.5 games per 7 days, variable schedule, it's just a lot harder to do. Um, Again, I think everything works, but just whatever an athlete's routine is, if it's successful, just keep them in that routine and just get them to the line 82 times. And that's probably the most optimal model in a suboptimal environment. That's really, it's just really tough to run a track and field like model within like a it's it would be very, very difficult in a team sport like basketball to kind of run. You know what I think about Coach
Yeah.
Boo, and I very much respect Randy. And they're right. When the biological organism is coming out of a vegetated state from a neuromuscular standpoint, it's usually going to be have less outputs. So if you play on Saturday and Sunday, if you're off Monday, they're typically going to be sluggish that Tuesday, even though it's coming out of an off day. If you have the liberty to kind of run a model where you can have 2 days in between a game and like, your day coming out of the off day is moderate and then a more high intensity but short practice going into the next game. I mean, that is a very good luxury to have. It's just the unfortunate reality of the NBA is like a lot of times you don't have that luxury of the built-in like off days or time in between games. So it really just depends on your schedule.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Switch topic. I remember like we are having this conversation when we're at Louisville. Uh, do you think in like the next, I don't know, 10, 15, or 20 years, European basketball or like Asia, like Japanese basketball gonna be better than USA right now?
What do you mean by better?
Like they might win the gold medal. Do you think
Oh
they will?
man, they have a lot of really good players, man. It's hard to say. It depends on what the NCAA does and if they reel it in a little bit. But what you'll see, and just as an observation, as NIL is exceeded like anything we could ever imagine as coaches, the first round, again as an observation in the draft last week, had more college kids than I'd seen in a long, long, long time. And I hadn't referenced it, but and a lot of them were international, coming from other places to come and play here. Um, so you're taking a kid from a different environment, whether that's an NBA academy in Africa or Euro League situation or B League or NBL in Australia, and putting him into our college model. Does that impede progress for that athlete? I don't know. It seems to work for certain guys at certain times. Um, so I don't know. To answer your question, I think it's an interesting case study to look at we just have such a talent pool and volume of athletes that I think will always be really competitive. But I mean, a lot of these countries are producing a lot of really, really good athletes, so it's hard to say.
Mm. Uh, Switch topic. Uh, Obviously, force velocity profiling been like a huge topic in the last few years, no matter it's vertical or like linear or lateral whatsoever.
Yeah.
This is just a thing that just came up in my mind like last couple days. Like, did anyone ever th think about like profiling athletes by just movement? Like, are they better at linear? Like the study we did with XYZ what
Mhm.
axis? Like
Yeah,
thoughts on
pro.
that?
Yeah, no, I think actually one of our next studies that we want to do is this idea of not necessarily force velocity, but incrementally loading different patterns, using the 1080 and motorized resistance device. And just to see, where you fit on, the load velocity relationship and the parabolic relationship, from, force and velocity or the power output. Um, so yeah, no, I think what you'll see is that, in a lateral shuffle, you standardize it relative to body mass, and then you incrementally load the machine and keep the movement pattern the same. You just look for where does the drop off occur. In a 10-meter ADA or a 5-5 lateral shuffle, you'll probably have certain athletes that are very high performing at low load but high entrance velocity. And then you'll probably have some athletes that are high load but low air entrance velocity. And there's less of a velocity decrement as you increase the load, right? Um, so I think that's kind of an interesting thing, in my mind, and how we, identified maybe some targeted ways to train in a specific manner or the for load velocity relationship based on incrementally loading patterns from a movement standpoint, just because everybody just kind of does like a barbell, squat, hex bar, deadlift, incremental load, and just say, hey, what's load at optimal power? What's our predictive 1RM? How can we be more targeted in our training just based on, running this profile? And I've found it to be beneficial over the years. I think it would be very interesting to apply the similar concept, but do it with maybe, some horizontal or lateral type movement, right? Like what is 10%, 15%, 20% body weight look like in a 10-meter ADA or a 5-5 lateral shuffle? And what are the training implications or interventions based on their deficits, right?
Mm, nice, nice. All right, last part of this podcast. I feel like I've been asking like this last part of the podcast a lot recently. Uh, at the combine, at NBA combine, like all the strength coaches like hang out together, and we actually talk about like all of us get a lot of like message DM about like, oh, how do you get there? Like, can we spend like 10 minutes with you or all that stuff? So, and a lot of them are asking like, what kind of research should I do? Should I go to like do I don't know PhD or something like that. And I want to start with this. At the Altitude Speed Summit, there's a panel talk about art versus science. Should strength coach follow the same discipline as a researcher when we do I don't know when we do our training? Should it go through the same research process? Thoughts on that? Like art versus science.
Well, so your question is like so you get a lot of inquiries on like process to get to a
No,
high
no, no,
level.
no, no.
It like
Forget about that. Just focus on
okay,
art versus science.
art versus science. Hmm. No, I mean, it's a great question.
I mean, you've been everywhere. You've been like you're a PhD, you're a biomechanist, you're a strength coach. You also came
Yeah.
from we all came from a chat background. So
Yeah.
we know what works, what don't work. So talk to me about your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot, again, everything works, Eric. a lot of the successful coaches I've been around are both artists and scientists. And even some coaches, sport coaches that you would deem not scientists, use the scientific method in a way that maybe they don't articulate it like we do, but they start with the observation or question, have an hypothesis, like run an experiment, and then disseminate the results, right? So, it's like, hey, I've noticed, this play really works well in ball screen situations or whatever it is. Okay, let me see. Okay, this supports it. Let me see if I can adjust. Let me tinker some things. So I think they may not articulate it in a way that's palatable to us or like we would express it, but they do use some form of observation and some form of being able to scale their observation and question that they have in a way that's like running an analysis and disseminating the results they have, right? Because ultimately they're just trying to win. Now that's the good ones. Um, as it relates to the art, man, I think self-efficacy and the athlete's belief and the team's belief in what they're doing is probably the primary driver of anything. I've seen a lot of coaches get up there and just confidently with conviction speak about things they have no clue about, and that be effective as well because they were just very good at selling things. So it's like, that I think the best I've been around can know what hat to put on when. Sometimes you got to be an artist, sometimes you got to be a salesman or woman, sometimes you got to be a scientist. I think the science probably should lay the foundation of a lot of the things you do, but at the end of the day, like there's again, the human body and the biological organism so complex, there's really only a few things we know for certain, or at least there's only a few things I know for certain. So I think in that regard, you have to be an artist in a way that like you're always trying to use the science to manipulate your program and change what you're doing. But I think the art kind of goes along with that. And sometimes, like who was it that said this? Swag. Like if you're uncertain, you just need swag. And that's just an acronym for a scientific wild ass guess. So based on all the known information, you just have to have swag. You're making the best guess with all of the information you have.
Nice, nice. All
Yeah.
right. So, last question. You start your career at a high school,
hmm
then go to Arkansas, then Sixers, Wizards, uh, Louisville, Japan. Like I said, you've been everywhere and with basketball. Um, like I said, like we get a lot of DM from everybody. Like, how do you get this role? Like, yeah. So, and I've been talking to young coaches. A lot of them want to be in the NBA like so fast. A lot of them want to go to like I don't know, whatever, so fast. So like some advice for like maybe young coaches out there, or like if you're able to talk to yourself when you're at like 24, what
hmm
advice would you give him?
No, that's a really good question, Eric. I think that, there's a lot of different paths and journey to get where you want to go. And the destination is never as good as the journey. So like my thing would be like the journey is the reward. Embrace the journey. Uh well, I'll use you as an example, Eric. Like your goal was always to be in the NBA, right? And you just had a relentless work ethic and did everything you could to like make that happen. And I just remember doing our first podcast together. Um, you know, had formalities, and I knew you had translated text from English, to Mandarin to make extra money, and I knew all the other stuff that you were doing to try to position yourself to, achieve your goals. And I'll never forget, I think we did the podcast on a Saturday, and I got an email from you on Monday saying like you applied to grad school and you want to come and work at the university. So I was like, man, this guy is this guy's really into it. So really, it's just like, everybody has a different route, but like if you really want to make that happen, you definitely, have the platform and opportunity to do so. But the journey is the reward always. It's not the
Nice.
destination.
Nice. Man, I love this. That's all the question I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Four times. So I rank what, third or fourth in the
Probably fourth.
hierarchy of
Probably fourth.
fourth? Okay. I
Yeah.
want to get 11.
Yeah, we should.
All right.
Honestly, I haven't let me start this.